Welcome back. We will resume the hearing session into matter 20, and we've reached site number 3, Sainsbury's Bell Green. Just turning to the council first, another site that wasn't initially considered with development potential, but has been reassessed. If the council could just fill us in on that background, please.
Reassessed in light of the evidence and background documents that the council submitted, the characterisation study, and also which we'll hear that in terms of the participants, that has got broad support by the landowner. It is obviously a site that makes up the potential opportunity area of Bell Green, Lower Sydenham. In terms of the development potential, again, we have a range of net residential units relating to the kind of scenarios of the delivery of the Bakerloo line extension. We have no pre-application or master plan which underpins this, so we've used the mathematical assumptions as we've set out before to the inspectors. The density assumptions that have been applied to this site, given its character and given the PTAL, is 145 dwellings per hectare, and then increasing to 355 dwellings per hectare should it be allocated as a or designated as an opportunity area, and the PTAL improved by the Bakerloo line extension. That gives a range of net residential units of 550 to 1,347 residential units as an indicative residential capacity. And then we've looked at the existing floor space, and I'm sure we'll hear from the participants about the need to replace the food store, but we've looked at 11,000 square meters gross of main town centre floor space and 2,750 gross employment floor space, which broadly combined to have a kind of a zero gain or minus in terms of non-residential uses. There is obviously a gain in terms of employment floor space, and again, this is to do with the strategy of providing jobs within this area and employment floor space to meet our office needs over the lifetime of the plan. There's a slight reduction, I say slight, 3,411 square meters of town centre floor space. I think that was based on our assumption of a more efficient supermarket footprint, but as I said, these are indicative capacities and obviously will be led by a design-led process.
And in terms of development requirements to manage potential adverse impacts of developing the site, what would the policy safeguards be and the proposed mitigations to the council, please?
So in terms of the development requirements, we do have the first requirement that we are looking to probably amend in terms of working in partnership, etc. But we also have requirements looking at making sure that the site is fully integrated with the surrounding street network, enhancing walking and cycling connections between public spaces and the surrounding neighbourhoods. We've got the delivery of new and improved public realm and open space in accordance with the site-wide public realm strategy, including enhancing public access to the Waterlink Way, which is immediately adjacent to the site. We have development requirement 4 talks about safeguarding land to support delivery of the strategic transport infrastructure, including the Bakerloo line extension. And then finally, we have got mention of the protection of green infrastructure, including the SYNC Green Corridor, Metropolitan Open Land, Pool River, etc.
And what infrastructure requirements will be needed for this site, and have they been costed?
I think the position at the moment is that we're unclear if there is any potential requirements for the Bakerloo line extension as of yet. And I'll maybe hand over to my colleagues from TfL to provide any guidance. But obviously, there are a number of options being looked at in terms of the location of the station, whether it's re-provided, moved, refurbished in terms of the Lower Sydenham station, etc. So there could be some land take required on the site, and the sites that we previously discussed, but we were unclear as of yet. But clearly there's some design work that's been undertaken at the moment, and we will have a better idea if there is any strategic infrastructure requirements further down the line when TfL, in terms of their programme, are looking at the Works Act, etc. So aside from the Bakerloo line extension requirements, there is no significant strategic infrastructure requirements. I think there is a need, and we recognise this, to look at Southend Lane and the gyratory as part of the wider framework. So there may be contributions then, therefore, required from the site to some improvements to the transport network and to pedestrian crossings, etc.
Thank you. And as part of that, there have been concerns raised about pedestrian safety and highway safety within that area. So, as part of the allocation, would that be covered?
Absolutely, that would be addressed, initially through any wider development framework in the broad sense, and then obviously as the site comes forward through the pre-application process, that would be discussed in more detail, and looking at improvements to that Southend Lane gyratory would be, dare I say, essential.
Thank you. TfL, please.
Thank you. That is just really to reiterate those points made about the BLE at the moment. In terms of any works beyond Lewisham town centre, including the Wearside depot there, we have not dealt or come up with a preferred option for any additional infrastructure beyond Lewisham itself for the phase 2. So this is going down to the Hayes and Beckingham junction. Ongoing studies are taking place at the moment, which will feed into our single preferred option, which is ultimately takes into account all the various options we've considered for the Bakerloo, whether that's the amount of trains, whether it should stop at Lewisham or go down to Hayes. And once that piece of work is done, which we are looking ideally kind of autumn 2025, we will be in a much clearer position to then start identifying which pieces of land may be needed for infrastructure beyond Lewisham town centre.
Yes, please.
Yeah, just on that, I think just in terms of the timescale for delivery of these sites towards the mid to end of the plan period, again, it's fortuitous because we will have then hopefully some concrete answers in terms of the final preferred option for the BLE, and then we can have some discussions around the any additional infrastructure requirements for sites within this area.
And in terms of viability, is it deliverable within the plan period?
Yeah, again, we looked at the local plan viability, looked at a number of options and scenarios depending on the percentage of affordable housing, and many of those scenarios were deliverable given the amount of residential, and obviously depending on the value of square meterage as well.
And in terms of land ownership, have we got multiple owners? Is the council a landowner or developer, or?
No, it's one ownership, and I believe the participant is here.
Sainsbury's, please.
Shall I just Sainsbury's support the principle of the allocation. Just as background, it's one of Sainsbury's best performing stores in the country. It's certainly one of the best, not one of the best performing store in the whole of Lewisham. I think it takes about over 70% of the trade from South Lewisham expenditure on food goes through that store. It's just massively successful. It's a vital facility. It employs, and just talking about employment use on the site, introducing employment uses on the site, it's forgotten that food stores employ a lot of people. The 280, I think 280 people, full-time equivalent, it's probably between 400 and 450 people actually working in the store. So it's very important to the local community. Probably 90% of those people will live within 2 kilometres of the site. So there's people who work there are local. In that context, what Sainsbury's want is a commitment that will get a replacement store of equivalent size with appropriate parking and servicing facilities as part of any redevelopment, and preferably with continuous trading. I think if we could get those words in the plan, I think Sainsbury's would be happy.
And to the council, how do you see this site actually coming forward in terms of phasing, and is there an opportunity for continued trading on the site?
Yes, we definitely think so, and obviously we'd have to work with Sainsbury's to understand how that could be possible. But we envisage that given the extensive surface car parking to the front of the store, that there could be an option where you have a temporary store whilst any redevelopment of the store is taking place. I think our intention certainly was within the site allocation to re-provide a food store. So we can certainly pop that in the text. I think we have got that in other allocations, the re-provision of a food store, so we can certainly put that there. In terms of car parking, we understand Sainsbury's positions, and we have worked through several schemes around about re-provision of car parking. I don't think the council can commit to re-providing the same amount of car parking on the site as it is now, because I think the GLA would frown upon that. There will be a negotiation through the development management process with ourselves, Sainsbury's and the GLA, like there is quite often on these sites, about what is appropriate level of car parking given the London Plan's stance on car-free and car-light development. I hope the participant can appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. We fundamentally recognise that food stores are an important employee within the borough. So again, I'm happy to put that reference in terms of re-provision of the food store.
The question first for the council and Sainsbury's really. It was mentioned that the store is one of the most successful in Lewisham and possibly the country. I'll ask Sainsbury's this first. Would you say the store's over-trading at present?
Yeah, the figures in the, I think it's EB24, the council's retail impact assessment. I think it's over trading by, I think it's in the statement. I think it's over trading by 68% or something like that. It is over trading, and that would be, that goes back to the point about we want a store of equivalent size, because obviously if you reduce the store, the over trading will get worse.
I just wondered, that the council mentioned that the actual the footprint, if you like, of the store may be reduced, and an assumption was made that that would be used more efficiently. I just wondered how that would sit if the store is currently over trading. And it may point towards the need for another supermarket in the area as a whole, but how that would fit with a reduced floor space coming forward. Do you think, for example, that a reduced floor space could be used more efficiently to sort of serve the area?
I'm sure it could be used more efficiently, and Sainsbury's have certainly planned stores. They've redeveloped stores at Nine Elms, and they've developed a store at Hendon. And an interesting, Hendon, they did have a temporary store on site to allow them to have continuous trading. Their starting point would be, though, we want equivalent, and they probably would work back from there, because they will look at it in detail and see how. And we're talking about a few years' time. Shopping habits are changing. I mean, interestingly, they are finding more people now are visiting stores and shopping in person at stores than they are buying things online. There was obviously an uptick over COVID, but it's got back down to the figures it was sort of well before COVID. So that's why they are very protective of their stores. So their starting point would be store of equivalent size, and then they would work back from that. And I'm sure they could. They've done it elsewhere successfully. They would work with the council to come up with a solution, a design solution to deal with that. And I do think it is worth. We've talked a bit about viability. But the bottom line for them is, if they don't get the store, they just won't bring the site forward. Their business is selling beans. That's where it's turning over. The store's turning over. This is just on food, about £2 million a week. It's a lot of money. If it doesn't work for them, and they haven't got the right store, and they haven't got servicing, car parking they need, it just won't come forward.
Of the council's view on the issue of the floor space and the retail need in this area, and how potentially reduced floor space might impact on that?
Yeah, again, our assumption was about store efficiencies, but again, I don't think there's too much disagreement here, and I think if we are, and obviously we've done a fairly high level kind of analysis of the existing floor space within the Sainsbury's store. If the participant was able to provide us with more detail in terms of the gross floor area of the store, we could see how that accurately compares to our figures within site allocation 3, and we can adjust that accordingly. Our intention was that there would be a re-provided store. If it is over trading, and if there is that need, then that's a positive. And if we can have a more urban model like Sainsbury's have done elsewhere, and provide additional ancillary uses plus residential above, then fantastic.
Just on the gross floor space is 14,060 square meters. But I think in the evidence base, I think it talks about replacement store of about 14,000 square meters, and it does say the impact, because the floor space is already there would be no impact because the store is already trading.
Green.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll go straight into Sainsbury's position. Sean here saying that if they don't get the whole package they want, they just won't, you know. It sounds pretty much like land banking to me. Now, I use the store on a weekly, if not several times a weekly basis. The current floor space is grossly underused. Areas of it have been taken out of trading. They keep shuffling things around. They have a sort of outside people coming in to use a bit, and then it isn't actually used at all efficient. Now, I have no problem with it, the shop being the same size, but where it gets really funny is the size of the car park. Now, we have photography and video, or for instance, this last Christmas Eve, where it was less than half full. I don't know exactly what they're waiting for in terms of there isn't a genuine use for it. Our problem with this is very much at the moment, we're struggling to see places not being maintained. We're being held hostage by a land bank, basically. Now, there's enough room for current use, even at Christmas Eve, for you to be redeveloping, having a meanwhile you sort of staying in the same store. You could be redeveloping a new site with a shop on the bottom, and so there's no disturbance to you at all, no impact on your trading. So I don't really see that as a problem. We haven't been able to get any discussions with them about current issues like the fact, I mean, we have been talking with TfL and Lewisham over the gyratory system issues. Traffic has been allowed to use Sainsbury's car park as a cut through to avoid the gyratory system, therefore making problems at either end. It's making it dangerous within the car park. There's nothing TfL can do about it because it's private land. So Sainsbury's is allowing this problem to be, and it would be very easy for Sainsbury's to put cameras at either end to actually check that people are actually stopping, not just using it as a road. You know, it is dangerous for pedestrians to cross the car park. There's very little in terms of safe pathways. In fact, they're currently removing more of the pavement in order to have strange new bunkers for their trolleys and taking out the most direct routes for pedestrians. So there's a lot of issues. Slightly on the strategic transport issue, I just want to flag up and would like it recorded that there are issues of when the railway was built, the land was sold to the railway company by the leather sellers company. I have all the legal documents. It was on condition that in perpetuity there'd be 3 level crossings. Now, these were closed off, I think, 2 during World War I for basically for safety of the gasworks and for security of the gasworks, because it was used as a strategic safe storage for fuel in World War I, so they didn't want people wandering through. Having said that, the point at which these level crossing went under the railway is still there, could be reopened. Can I also point out that because Sainsbury's hasn't put a simple, very cheap bridge across the river to match up to the Moormead tunnel underneath the railway, pedestrians coming from the Moormead side are forced to go down to the most polluted bit of the road and then walk up the most polluted bit of the road on the other side. It's the most unhelpful. Very tiny little modifications would be a sign that Sainsbury's isn't just squatting on it and just doesn't care about the local community. So, and finally, I would say that there are also on the eastern boundary, there's a lack of the way the boundary has been set up between the park and Sainsbury's loading bay means that you can no longer walk up the side there, which you used to be able to. And that means, again, that in order to get from A to B, you have to do a huge diversion around the most polluted, the most narrow pavements, just the most unpleasant experience for local residents. And the people in Moormead are your closest neighbours. They are your closest customers. And to get to your store, it's quite funny if you have a look on the map. So do take a wander around. It'd be useful. Okay, I think that's me. Thank you.
Thank you. But just in turn, bringing it back to the policy and the allocation, out of those points that you've just raised, what do you feel is not covered in the development requirements or the guidelines? Is there anything particular that Belgreen Forum were seeking out of this? We hear your points. Sainsbury's have heard your points about the current arrangements as well. But looking at the allocation, is there?
I think I would say that the big thing is the difficulty in the permeability to get from the Sainsbury's, the main car park, trying to get just to the river. None of the bridges match up, so you can cross the river, but you can't cross the rail, and the other way round. It's a mess. I don't think it's unreasonable that we should be looking for this to be tidied up if they're going to be redeveloping. And frankly, it would be neighbourly for something to be done anyway. But yeah, I would like to see improved permeability and to come up with an agreement on what we've got at the moment is we have an adopted road on which alderman is it? I can't remember. Which ends up in their car park, and then the traffic is making its way through the car park to the thing. I mean, this is dangerous. There is a gate which is supposed to stop this happening. It's kept permanently open until travellers come around, and then Sainsbury's decide to lock it. But except when travellers are due, it's a free-for-all. And I think that there ought to be more cooperation, because if TfL are going to spend money on rejigging our gyratory system, it's a joke if Sainsbury's are just producing a diversion.
Thank you. Just coming to the council, out of the development requirements and the development guidelines and the points that Belgreen Forum have raised in terms of the allocation, are those points covered within the requirements and the guidelines?
Yes, I believe so. As I said, we've got development requirements that cover things like new and improved public realm and open space in accordance with the site-wide public realm strategy, enhanced public access to Waterlink Way, development guideline 1, development should deliver a more cohesive and rational road network and street pattern in coordination with other site allocations. There's an opportunity to open up a new east, west and north, south walking and cycling links to create a legible and more permeable network of routes. So I think everything that has been said is within the development requirements and development guidelines to answer the question.
Sainsbury's.
Just for clarification, I have passed Ms. Webb's Bruno Moore, the planning manager of Sainsbury's, email address, so I regret it already. Sorry. He those site specific issues now. Hopefully, he can be aware, made aware of.
Thank you. That's helpful. Obviously, operational concerns about the present situation are not really within our scope. We're looking at the allocations and what's being planned for the future. But thank you for that. So in terms of the housing trajectory, this site is coming in at year 11 to 14. And is that on both the trajectories?
It is, yes. Again, we've put it towards the end of the planned period, 11 to 14, to give us adequate time to do the site-wide framework, but also, to work with Sainsbury's to bring forward a more comprehensive, compact store and have those discussions through the pre-application process.
And have we got a timeline for pre-application and applications? Are there any thoughts being given to that yet?
None yet, no.
And in terms of the approach to tall buildings set out in the development guidelines, is there anything specific about this site that the council would like to offer the examination?
The site has been identified as a suitable location for tall buildings in line with policy QD4 building heights. I think we've also got development guidelines in there that talks about development should be designed to provide an appropriate transition in bulk scale and massing from the site to their surrounding areas.
Sydenham Society.
Hi, can I just make a brief point that the southeast corner of this site was one area where we felt that taller buildings would be appropriate, provided they're associated with new transport infrastructure. So that's going up to 16 stories.
Thank you. Sydenham Society, your nameplate's up. Is that still up? Thank you. Anything finally on this site? For the council for final comment?
Nothing further, no.
Any modifications?
No modifications for this allocation.
Okay, moving on to site number 4, Stanton Square. If the council could just outline the background and what's changed and whether the land use split affects the employment land requirement, please.
Yeah, so in terms of Stanton Square, Elsis, it was an existing site allocation, which was LEL. We, through the London SLA 2017, it had zero probability of being delivered at that time. We then, as I said, we then prepared the characterization study, but also the employment land study, which looked at the potential of some of our LELs, and sorry, we're calling them ELSIS now, to effectively be redeveloped and co-locate residential above improved employment facilities. So we feel that that is an appropriate response. One of the landowners expressed an interest to develop the site through the call for sites exercise and at the Regulation 18 consultation. The other landowner did not object to the site being identified. There is broadly 3 parcels of land, and I believe they're in 3 separate ownerships, but I may be wrong about that. We did receive some an initial pre-application discussion with a developer which had looked at 2 of the 3 parcels of land, but this was some time ago. Nevertheless, we still think it is an appropriate site for redevelopment given its position, and also that it could offer the potential to improve employment and commercial space on the ground floor and then residential above. We have taken a similar approach, given that we're not in advanced pre-application stage or there is a master plan which underpins this with the mathematical approach, and also a similar approach to the uplift that we've used elsewhere in terms of the net residential floor space. And then we, in terms of the non-residential, we've used the 33% employment floor space, which we've used on other ELSIS land, which equates to 3,249 square meters of gross employment floor space, which is a net gain of 1,229 square meters of employment floor space, primarily because a large proportion of the site is essentially yard space being used for scaffolding.
And in terms of the potential adverse impacts of developing this site and how they could be mitigated, what constraints have we got on this particular site?
I think there are some. Fine buildings on the site, which are of heritage value. There is obviously lower scale development to the west of the site, including the pub, which we'd obviously see kind of transition in scale and appropriate transition in terms of use. There's also the school and residential area to the south, which again would have to be kind of mitigated in terms of the transition in scale. To the north, less constraints, given that it is essentially onto Southend Lane, and then also the future site allocations, which could be redeveloped through and in parallel with or in response to an overarching framework to get an appropriate solution.
In terms of those heritage assets, is it appropriate to include that Art Deco old bathhouse within the boundary? I know we've got development guideline number 5.
So it's a non-designated. It's I think it's neither designated or non-designated. It is a building of interest. I think for clarity, and this is brought out within the proposed modification. It's not an Art Deco building. It is an Art Deco style building. So I think stylistically it is of interest. If I'm reading the policy requirements correctly, it's consideration be given that for its retention rather than a desire for retention. I think, sorry, a requirement for retention, full stop. In terms of the more genuine heritage interests, just again for the inspector's clarification, that those are, as David suggested, located on the western side of the site. They are, I think, a mix. There is the public house, but there's also a sort of a terrace of, I think, Victorian period buildings that includes the reclamation yard. I think those are adjacent to the ELSIS boundary, but don't. And are contiguous with it, but don't actually form part of the ELSIS, although functionally they're part of the employment offer that sits on that island. Thank you.
Yes, I picked up the Art Deco building from development guideline number 5, and it said a preserved 20th century Art Deco building rather than an Art Deco style. And I know it's been picked up by several representations that are concerned about it. So just to try and sort that one out.
Yes. I think it's a sort of a sideline, but it did have myself and our conservation officer Joanna Eccleston scratching our heads. But yes, it's a mid 20th century Art Deco style building, and the modification picks up on that.
Bell Green, please.
Quite a few points there. Firstly, the bathhouse is extremely important. I've actually tried to get it listed. Can't do that until it's technically in danger. I have requested for it to be locally listed, but never heard any more about it. The importance of it is actually the interior, which is extremely important because it's much of the bathhouse is actually in its original. It would be an extremely valuable thing as an art gallery, or it could be extended. There are many things that could be done with it. It would be a huge loss. I believed it was locally listed. If you know, I thought it certainly had been requested, but anyway, we'll take your word on that, and something needs to be done about it. The Art Deco building actually belongs to Coventry Scaffolding further along, and people are fond of it. I think it's worth noting it's there, and that it would have to be replaced by something pretty good for us not to be cross about it. I'd also like to, there were 2 other points. Number 1, the Coventry Scaffolding end of this site is the site of the original gasworks of 1852-ish, the Sydenham Gas and Coke Company, which then almost immediately became the Crystal Palace. As that was generating town gas at the very earliest stage, it's likely to be even more contaminated than the rest, the main part of the I'm aware that this hasn't made it onto the radar of Lewisham, but not for want of trying. But the big one for me, and part of the frustration is, you know, for years you write, you communicate, but you never get things in writing back. I raised the point that Stanton Square was a London square. It was redeveloped in the 70s. There doesn't seem to be any paperwork. There was no restitution. I'm told that Lewisham has now deemed that some other land that they owned already is the substitution, but seeing as they already owned it, I don't quite see. And in any case, that land has not been maintained in a manner fit for a London Square. This is I haven't been able to get an answer to this until I discovered, like, last week that, oh no, I'd been talking to the developer who bought it, the Access, very nice chap who owns their land, and there were various issues on the failure to maintain there was supposed to be a non-hard standing area for green, and what I was hoping was we could do make an arrangement that either now or in the future, instead of our London Square, we could have a pathway crossing along the side, which is a no-build zone because of the mature trees anyway, and that would improve the permeability of Bell Green. I've sent this over so many times, but it's a surprise every time. Do you know what I mean? We were talking to him about that. He was up for planting more trees and making up for some of the mistakes they'd done, but Lewisham put all the effort into proving that the developer didn't have to give us anything. So I've seen nothing. I mean, things were a bit more fluid in the 70s, to be polite, but there is a statutory responsibility attached to London squares, and I do not see why I've had to fight so hard to get an answer in writing and the clear position, and someone come back to me and say what the decision is, rather than just wandering off and then I find years later that it has not been taken on board. So I would like a clarification on exactly where the land that the developer was allowed to redevelop, what they gave in exchange to the local community, and whether Lewisham can actually explore the issue of having a pathway across the Stanton Island site.
Thank you. I'll just come back to the council for some of those points. Some of the points might be things that you want to take away, and obviously we might not be able to resolve them right here in this session right now. But in terms of what this allocation is aiming for and the guidelines therein, council, please.
Yes, in terms of the London Square, I think there's been quite a lot of work done by our conservation officer to look into this, to respond to this, and I think we will. If we haven't published it, then we've got modifications that pick up on this. I think the simple fact is that, you know, this happened in 1970. Whenever it was, and we just simply couldn't find the paperwork associated with this. I believe we have found now, through, you know, the hard work of our conservation officer doing a lot of digging, we have found reference made to where the land swap took place. So we now have a location for that, and we will provide that. I think we talked about in the green infrastructure matter that London Square, so we can clarify that with the Bell Green Forum. In terms of the developer requirements and developer guidelines, again, we have got guidelines there that talks about the improving the permeability of the site, and you know, we would certainly you know, be happy to discuss within the framework, and also with the landowners coming forward of a north-south route, improving permeability through that site.
For the inspector's information, so this was discussed, I think, in week 2, in relation to, so this is another part of the plan. It's not directly the heritage section. It's schedule to table 21.2 at the back of the new local plan, and this issue is covered by modification MO 155, which is a table that sort of effectively explains the factual position in relation to London squares across Lewisham.
Bill Green.
Hi, this is not the only London Square that's gone missing. I did already add Addington Grove onto the list, which Lewisham have forgotten about. There's one outside or opposite St Dunstan's School, which has gone missing. It was turned into a bus island. I'm not saying that's one, but I'm saying the list, they haven't gone through the whole list and actually tracked them down. I don't think it's acceptable. And if you can't actually provide a map showing exactly what was substituted, just there's a vague address that's something over there, which the council had already bought in order to do a development. I mean, so it was doing a favour for a mate. It appears there's no evidence that it was done legitimately. And look, until there's clarity on this sort of level of detail, how can this allocation be sound? I would say I brought this thing forward like 3 or 4 years ago. I've repeatedly brought it up. They always say, oh, we'll get back to you, we'll have a discussion. It never happens. And then they don't talk to you, and then you get a dismissive comment saying, oh, well, everything's fine. Well, our community has been constantly sold down the river, and this is just, yeah, I would say that this allocation is unsound until they sort this out.
Well, I've heard from the council on this point, and I've heard that they're willing to talk to the Bell Green Forum, and I think that's as far as I can take it in this session today.
May I feed back to you when and if they do have that conversation, because I've had this promise many times. So can I feed back if they don't get back to?
Well, we are in the examination session now, and when the council have had an opportunity to talk to you, I'm sure you can have that conversation, but within the confines of this session and the examination hearings, then I think we need to move on. Thank you. In terms of bringing the site forward, I'm just trying to scan through my questions here. Is the intention for a phased development, or is it a single site delivery? What are the council thoughts?
In all likelihood, it would be a phased delivery. The 2 parcels of land that are not in control by the Bell Green Access self-storage, they were the 2 parcels of land that the developer had an interest in, which came to us some years back. Those sites are probably easier to develop in easier to develop given the use, and then obviously the self-storage unit could come forward at a later date. Nevertheless, we'd be looking to agree those kind of principles of development. I don't think there's a huge amount in terms of the size of the site to agree in terms of the principles, but we probably do need to set some principles in terms of the scaling massing, but also that permeability that we had sort of discussed with the forum.
And the trajectory, the housing trajectory has this down as year 13, so it's towards the end of that 15-year period.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
And in terms of viability, the viability study shows that it's viable to a point across the page, isn't it?
Yes, obviously it looked at the entire site. I would say that I think there are probably elements of the site which are more viable and elements which are less viable. What we find is the self-storage sites are actually have quite a high residual land value, probably higher than the scaffolding yard, etc.
Would that affect then how it would come forward if if it's only viable across the whole site and it might come forward in phases?
Yes, I think I was agreeing that it probably would come forward in phases. It's likely that the scaffolding yard and the studio to the north might come forward in advance of the self-storage. I think in terms of how it's reflected in the trajectory, I'm just having a look. Apologies. Yeah, we've only got that in a single year, so if I may, we could take that away and split that down appropriately to just consider the phasing of that site.
I guess it's whether the viability stacks up just on the scaffolding yard part of the site. If you see where I'm coming from, whether that's likely to come forward, whether it would be viable without the self-storage part of the site. Just a question in my mind.
It is a good question, and it may very well be that a developer wishes to kind of purchase the whole site to effectively enable a more comprehensive development and make the site more viable. Quite tricky to see how we reflect that within the trajectory, but again, we'll be guided by the inspectors on that.
As an action point, you're looking to sort of split the trajectory to reflect the potential phasing.
Yep, we can do that, yep.
So in terms of the infrastructure requirements and the costs and physical constraints, the issue of contamination has cropped up again in various different representations. So is it a known contaminated site from statutory definition terms, or is it going to be one of the use of the new policy on ground conditions together with standard conditions on planning applications with the various stages that you get in the conditions?
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think that is what we had intended. I guess given its historic use and given this site, the Sainsbury site, and the retail park site, we could, within the development guidelines, just add a bullet point around contamination just to flag that up within development guidelines.
I think that would be helpful, please, if that could be an action. Thank you. Any modifications to this particular allocation, please?
Yes, I would refer the inspectors to submitted document PD11, and it is modification reference MO262, and as per the discussion, it is that factual addition or factual clarification. So at paragraph 17.30 development guidelines, point 5, inserted additional text, the sentence will now read, the retention and incorporation of the well-preserved mid-20th century Art Deco style building currently occupied by Coventry Scaffolding should be considered as part of the overall design.
If I may, there is one more modification that we may have to make, and that is to a small modification to the site boundary of the site allocation, and it is the removal of the western extents, the little projection there, which apologies, but if you stand on Southend Lane, it looks like a site for redevelopment, but it is actually the pub's garden, the beer garden. So we want to remove that from the site allocation boundary.
Belgreen?
May I just point out that the extent of the Bell's grounds and beer garden, what have you, was contained in our asset of community value application, which we made at the same time as the LIVSI, so it's on record. All that. Thank you.
Do you need
We
to
can have a look at the land ownership detail and make sure that the boundary is accurate in terms of the site allocation.
Okay, let's move on to site number 5, Sydenham Green Group Practice site. Now, this is another site where the landowners expressed an interest to develop the site through an engagement exercise, and the landowner is engaged in pre-application discussions with the council. So, is there anything further that we've moved on with that, please?
No, we were at very early stages of the pre-application discussions. This is part of the One Public Estate strategy by the Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust. It's part of a wider strategy to increase capacity across the council in terms of health care facilities. In this particular case, I think, as I described, there's a range of options from refurbishment to redevelopment. This option is redevelopment, so redevelopment of the existing and re-provision of the healthcare facility. So we've, at the moment, it's based on a kind of theoretical basis, particularly in terms of the net residential using that sliding scale that we've used as part of the Bakerloo line extension uplift, but also just to make sure that we have reflected the floor space capacity that was required by the NHS Trust. It should be said as well that there's a small proportion of this site allocation which is not in the Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust, which is to the northeast of the site, which is 86 to 92 Bell Green, which is currently under construction for 22 net residential units.
And those 21 residential units are in the allocation, or are they outside of the allocation?
It's within the site allocation figures, yes.
If those sites are under construction, do they need to be reflected within the allocation? Is that reflected in the trajectory?
Yes, at the bottom of the page there, at the bottom of the page underneath the section which talks about other large consented sites, the last site on the list is 68 to 92 Bell Green, and that's the 22 units there which are coming forward in year one.
So it's outside of
It is outside, sorry, yeah. So the 14 is the remainder for the rest of the site.
So what are the infrastructure requirements and costs? Have we got some constraints? We talked about re-providing that health centre. How would that be managed in the overall redevelopment of the site itself?
I'm not sure we're at that stage yet with discussions with the NHS Trust. As I said, the pre-application discussions that we initially had were very high level concept stage at this time.
Just in terms of viability, has it been assessed as a sort of site typology as opposed to specific site? And if so, which typology?
Yes, it's been assessed as a typology. So I think it's typology 15. Which is mixed use, including health facility. The typology that we've used has 60 units as a sort of benchmark for the typology. Obviously, this site, we've got a kind of range of net residential units that will be discussed through the pre-application process and in terms of the requirement.
So it seems to stack up in terms of viability. Would that be with or without funding from, say, the NHS, for example?
I think if I could leave that until the viability matter that we can discuss with our expert. I did have a look at that and have a discussion with Angela on that matter, and we're unsure as to whether or not that makes the assumption that the cost of the health centre would be provided elsewhere. It would appear to me, given our previous experience on other sites that we're working on at the moment, that obviously the cost of a health centre is quite considerable. So, but if we can pick that up in the viability matter, if I may.
Thank you.
Yes, I
modifications?
sort of I fully appreciate that David could not possibly be aware of every single strand of work that is, although he's doing a fantastic job, if I may say so. He is my boss, so I have to say that. I can assure the inspectors that the council are working very closely with the NHS Trust on infrastructure planning. I would refer the inspectors to forthcoming matter 23 and the council's submission to the responses to the matters, issues and questions raised under that. I would specifically refer the inspectors to Annex 1 of that response, which not only sets out the local education authorities' input into the infrastructure delivery plan update, but also the NHS Trust's input into the interim IDP update. If you do a very simple word search within there, there are a number of references to the work that the Trust are doing in respect of the Sydenham Green practice and their confidence in bringing it forward in relation to their infrastructure planning needs. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Belgreen, please.
Hi, just to say really quickly that we were a bit, we were promised an expanded health centre to several tower blocks ago, and it's incredibly overstretched. And the local plan, when I read it, our quarter of Lewisham, I think it's 4 different hubs there are supposed to be. I can't remember the technical term, sorry. But ours has, it's in the, we're considering Belgreen, but it'd be nice to see that promoted to a firm in determination, because it does depend on Lewisham as well as the health authority. Does council wish to make any comment?
Again, the council's working with the NHS Trust on bringing forward the One Public Estate strategy, which includes this site, which is why we've included it within the local plan.
Any modifications?
There is a single modification. It is set out in PD 11 and repeated within the addendum submitted today. It's modification MO263, and it relates to the net remaining units to be delivered, 14. It also sort of reiterates the points raised by my colleagues in terms of numbers completed against the total target for the site. Thank you.
There's nothing else on allocation number 5. We'll move on to number 6, please. And to the council first. In terms of the background, please.
Yeah, so this site was identified for employment-led co-location development within the Employment Land Study 2019, which is why we've indicated it as a site allocation within the plan. It's close to the existing Lower Sydenham station. Immediately south is new residential development that has been delivered on Bromley, in London Borough of Bromley. Having reviewed the businesses on the site, that it is a kind of thriving area of employment. What I would say is that there is a lot of employment which doesn't fall into the industrial categorization, but is nevertheless very valuable, such as an architectural practice, gyms, there is a dance school, and other office uses within there, some of which is looking a little tired and dated, and we think that a comprehensive redevelopment of the site, albeit it may have to be in stages because of the site ownership, but could offer replacement floor space for those types of uses, and then intensification with residential above. We've used the theoretical mathematical kind of analysis that we've described before, and we've also applied the uplift because of the site's proximity to a potential future Bakerloo line extension. That then gives us a range in terms of net residential of 113 to 179. We've then applied a 60% employment figure onto that to ensure that effectively we're meeting like for like the existing employment floor space that we have on the site at the moment.
And do we have any strategic infrastructure required for this site and the costings of that?
No strategic infrastructure required on the site at present. This is one which, again, subject to discussions, decisions around the BLE station, there could be land take required if the station remains at Lower Sydenham as the Bakerloo Line extension station. But that isn't decided as of yet.
And what other physical constraints might this development need to consider when it comes forward?
I don't think there's a great deal of physical constraints in terms of bringing forward the site. There is obviously existing residential properties to the east, which any development would have to respond positively to.
And it's got down that it's a critical drainage area. Are there any specific measures that are necessary to go with that critical drainage area?
I think most of the sites within this area are in a critical drainage area, and therefore, the applicants would have to work in partnership with Thames Water on that basis.
And this site is looking at 113 units in year 11 on the trajectory. So is that still realistic? Has there has there been any discussions or progress towards an application on that one?
No progress as of yet, no.
And in terms of land ownerships, have we got single owners, multiple owners? Have they expressed interest in redeveloping?
It is, there's multiple ownerships, I think, in this site, and we haven't had any objection to the site being included as site allocation, but conversely, I don't think we've had any strong commitment from the developers or engagement at this stage.
So how do you envisage the site coming forward? If there's been no sort of particular interest, there's no objection to the site coming forward, but no particular interest either. How do you envisage the site coming forward?
I mean, if I may, I could double check with my development management colleagues to see if there has been any historic interest from landowners on this. I'm just not aware of any through the local plan preparation.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Belgreen?
Hi, just a very quick couple of points. This includes the original access to the rail yard, the goods yards. It includes a heavy duty, heavy good vehicles ramp up to trackside. So wherever the station ends up being, it looks to me like it's an access point which is going to be necessary for sort of strategic getting the material there. The other point I'd like just quickly to make is that although not particularly lovely, the block you're talking about with the ballet school and the architects, that's actually the Baird factory. As soon as the Baird TV works moved down from Crystal Palace after the fire, opened up there. It then went into radar stuff in World War II, and afterwards it was very important in some technology I don't understand about transferring film onto video and onto TV. So it has historical, and I would like its history to be recorded, and to, you know, so even if to know what is there before it goes, and you know, to have links in terms of names, and you know, so sort of for the history to be on record. This is, it doesn't look very impressive, but it's recognizably the same structure, and I can show you a photo of the Baird works. So thank you.
Just to the council, please. Any comments and then any modifications, please?
We're not aware of any heritage assets of the site. I mean, I can certainly flag this up with our conservation officer to see if she is aware of any heritage assets on the site.
Sorry, can I just say, I happily hand you the press cuttings, which all relate to it. You know, there's no need for her to spend her time reinventing the wheel.
Well, I think if you'd like to share something on that matter outside of the hearing session, and then the council can take a look at it. Are there any modifications for this particular allocation?
There is a single modification, and it comes in response to the supporting representation on this site during the Regulation 19 consultation from the London Borough of Bromley. So the council is prepared to modify paragraph 17.38, which is development guidelines, to include reference for the need for partnership working with the neighbouring London Borough of Bromley in relation to potential impacts upon the neighbouring Lower Sydenham Elsis and the metropolitan open land located further south along Worsley Bridge Road. Thank you.
Okay, it's 13 minutes past 3. I think we'll take a quick comfort break for 10 minutes. About 20 past 3. Thank you. We'll adjourn until then.
Welcome back, everybody. It's all right. Are we waiting for anybody else in the foyer there that anyone's aware of before I start? No. Right, okay, we're moving on now to site number 8 and land at Pool Court. The Gypsy and Traveller site. I'm conscious we've touched on it to a degree, but can the council set out how the site was identified and which options were considered, please?
Yes, so the site has been through an extensive and rigorous site selection process starting back from 2016. We were preparing a single issues local plan for the Gypsy and Traveller sites. At that time, there have been various stages in the process, including public consultation at each stage for the approval of the site selection parameters and criteria. I believe there was over 300 sites assessed as part of that, which looked at council-owned and adjacent sites. That was then narrowed down to a short list of which there was greater scrutiny on that short list, down to a selection of 2 sites, and again further scrutiny of those 2 sites, again with public consultation through that. So in 2018, having undertaken that work, the council concluded that land at Pool Court was its preferred site for Gypsy and Traveller accommodation. At that point, that was when the decision was taken that it would essentially move into and become a site allocation within the Lewisham's new local plan, and then since then, Regulation 18 and 19, it's been through public consultation as well.
Just in terms of that site selection process, was the sustainability appraisal or integrated impact assessment, were they part of that selection process? Did the sites go through that process?
This was prior to the EIA on the new draft local plan.
In terms of the narrowed down sites, the 2 sites that were kind of subject to more scrutiny, as you phrased it.
Again, I think the council had decided on its preferred option in 2018 prior to the EIA for the regulation, for the preparation of the Regulation 18 local plan.
So when you say the sites were subject to more scrutiny, can you just talk me through that? What do you mean by that? What factors were considered, and what were the decisive factors, if you like, in the selection of this particular site?
Yeah, so there was, again, we can provide further evidence if we haven't provided that to the examination. But the 2 sites that were effectively the shortlist of the shortlist, one was to the north of the borough, which included a community centre, and one, and then obviously there was the Pool Court site to the south of the borough. What we looked at was a kind of indicative layout to see how many sites, how many pitches we could get on the site. Both sites could achieve the then requirement of the 6 pitches, albeit both sites couldn't take much more than the 6 pitches. The northern site would require the demolition and reprovision of community use elsewhere. and through discussions and representation from other stakeholders, including the police, it was deemed that the southern site would be more appropriate in terms of safety. Those considerations and criteria were then considered by the council, and the council made the decision that Pool Court was the preferred option.
And were the requirements to increase, for example, would the other site come back into play, do you think, in terms of needing to provide extra additional provision?
It is something that the council would obviously have to look at, given the advice at the time from the police. I think the wording in the council decision, and forgive me, it was quite a long time ago, was that whilst the Pool Court was the preferred site, it wasn't ruling out the second site. If I may, I could get the exact wording on the recommendation for the inspectors.
But both sites could only really accommodate 6 pitches in their own right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And what constraints were identified in terms of this particular site, which may be an issue in terms of bringing the site forward?
So there are 2 principal constraints on the site. So part of the site is identified as a sink, which is adjacent to the river. And the other constraint was flooding. The council's obviously, I think, as we discussed before, the council is bringing forward and has submitted a planning application for the site. In terms of a correction, it is for the potential of 7 pitches, the application, which is 1 more than the requirement. I say the potential because in terms of flood risk, we've been working with the Environment Agency, and the Environment Agency are happy with the solutions that we've put forward. The option that is being submitted does, however, eat into the existing sink. And obviously that will have to be assessed through the development management process in terms of the negative impact that it has in terms of removing part of that sink. And I guess there, in terms of that assessment, there's also the requirement for the 10% biodiversity net gain to be considered through the development management process as well. So I guess what I'm saying is it may very well be that the site can only accommodate 6 pitches when we look at the constraints of the B&G, and we may be looking at how to minimise any impact or loss on that sink.
So in terms of flood risk, is it zone 2 across the site, or does it vary depending on the location, proximity to the river?
I'd have to take that away and provide an accurate response to that. I have got down here that it's within flood zones 1 and 2, but I'd have to. I can't see from zooming into the map exactly where that boundary lies.
And you say that the Environment Agency are happy with the mitigation proposed. What type of mitigation being proposed to overcome the flood risk?
I'm afraid I don't know. I'm not party to the preparation of the application. Certainly get that information to the inspectors.
You mentioned that that this was potentially for 7 pitches, although that might revert back to 6 pitches, and that involved going into the sink. Does that mean the red line boundary in terms of the allocation boundary would change, or is the allocation boundary as shown? Would that reflect the application?
Yes, the application or the site allocation boundary will stay the same and reflect the planning application boundary.
And how is the site capacity determined in terms of the number of pitches? I think there's a sort of a standard kind of formula, isn't there, that you can use to define the kind of space requirement, if you like, for a pitch.
Yes, absolutely. We've done some detailed work on this, obviously through the application as well. We have used the guidance that is available but is no longer in use, but is generally used for the kind of site arrangements for gypsy and traveller accommodation.
The potential adverse impacts of developing the site haven't been referred to at present.
We don't see any further adverse impacts on developing the site for residential use and gypsy and traveller residential use.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hall?
Thanks. I think I spoke on this matter at an earlier hearing, so I won't go through it. And it is in my regulation 19 letter. I think you mentioned other adverse effects, and I'm just rereading my comments, and it needs to be remembered that this is the crossover of 2 railway lines, and at the same point, it's the confluence of 2 rivers, the River Ravensbourne and the River Pool. So we get the flooding, but we also get the fact that there are 2 different railway lines crossing at the same time. So there could be adverse effects there. I think the council's own independent report, which I have referenced as, is it AECOM did this report, and they agree that I think it's, if I just double check what I put, that this particular area shown at the intersection, it's at the intersection of flood zone 2 as opposed to flood zone 3 as well. I think that you picked up the risk of flooding. The point I would like to again perhaps add is the Environment Agency has a flood monitoring station at this point. I don't know how many they have across London, but this is one of them. And I'm presuming it's there for a reason. The clue's usually in the name. So I make those points. Those are the adverse effects. Intersection of 2 railway lines, 2 rivers. you've got constraints on the site, you've got the sink. There's reference in the independent, in the council's specialist consultants report about the need for biodiversity. This was part of a sink itself, and all the area surrounding it is in a sink. I mean, that's common ground, and David has just alluded to the fact that some of it might have to come out of a sink, out of a biodiversity area. So the final conclusion is about the adequacy of the provision overall for travellers. And again, I think there's doubt whether this actually meets the London Plan requirements. And I'll just leave it there. I should mention that my original submission prior to Regulation 19 was also included some advice that I received from Phoenix Community Housing, who I see in the room.
I'll take Belgreen Forum first and then allow the council the opportunity to respond.
Hi, I just wanted to say one very short thing. I went to the consultation for that in this very room several years ago now. And I made the point then, and I think it still stands. We very much need provision for travellers. As you can tell from the road names, you know, Gypsy Hill and what have you, travellers have been moving through our landscape for hundreds of years now, always have, always will, and they're a welcome part of our community. What we need is a stopping site. This seems to me like a very small way of ticking a box. So, oh, we've covered ourselves. But what is actually needed for the wider community is a stopping site. So there's a legitimate, safe, secure site where people can, in passing through. And for residential sites, it would have been more appropriate to work with Bromley, who have more sites in suitable areas. But we very much need somewhere where people can legitimately stop without causing a problem for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll look to the council to confirm this, but I don't believe the study identified the need for transit provision.
No, it didn't. And also in terms of intelligence from our colleagues, again, in terms of stopping sites, illegal stopping sites, it's actually quite few and far between in Lewisham in comparison to other London boroughs. There is a need for the Gypsy and Traveller pitches that we've identified. I mean, just in terms of picking up the participant's point about next to a railway and next to a river, many residential sites next to railways and next to rivers that we could name, none of this should prohibit development. It will have to be mitigated, of course, but I don't particularly see the difference between the Poole Court estate, which is effectively immediately adjacent to the Western Railway, and the residential Gypsy and Traveller site that we're proposing to the east of the site.
Just as a very brief footnote, in my travels around the country doing this role, I've come across many successful Gypsy and Traveller sites that have been located in remarkably similar locations next to habitat and ecology, designated sites of habitat and ecology, or next to transport infrastructure, that they can 100% be made to work successfully and provide good quality accommodation for members of the community.
Mr. Hall.
Just for clarity, my argument isn't, I'm not arguing against provision. My argument is about the adequacy of this provision and the need to provide proper accommodation for and my concern is for the travelling community that it doesn't even meet the London Plan quantum. So it doesn't meet the quantum. It doesn't. It impacts on there are impacts on the current usage, and it reduces. There is no provision for the increase in biodiversity that's required. So it's about a balancing act. So really, I suppose I would be arguing that this site is inadequate. That's what I'm really saying. It's not against provision. And you can make anything work. But the constraints on this site, we've heard that there were 7 pitches and going down to 6. Already just in this hearing, I've heard that it was supposed to be about 12 when it was originally planned and it went down to 6 because of the constraints of the site. That's what we're arguing. It's a very constrained site.
I'd like to respond to that, please.
I've never seen plans for 12 pitches on this site. There wouldn't be any feasible way to locate 12 pitches on this site.
Mr. Hall, can I just remind you these are formal proceedings, not to talk across the table, please. I appreciate it can be frustrating, but if you could just talk through ourselves, that would be appreciated. Thank you. So there were no plans at all for 12 pitches on the site.
It wouldn't be physically possible on the site.
In terms of the potential highway implications, I note the councillor's response that it's in use at the moment and potential movements are likely to be less than the current use. And again, I think we touched on this in terms of how the site is going to be brought forward. So it's going to be a council-led scheme to bring the site forward.
Yes, indeed. So we have an agreement to purchase the Network Rail part of the land. So there's part of the land which is in council ownership, part of the land which is the scaffolding yard in Network Rail land, and we are in the process of buying that site. We have funds committed not only to purchase the site but also to deliver the accommodation. The planning application has been submitted. We would hope that would be determined this year, and then we can move on to the delivery.
You'll have to remind me, as the Network Rail, there's a statement of common ground that was referred to the other day. Has that been submitted yet? I'm not.
We have it as an action to chase them. It's on my list of things to do tomorrow morning.
We're keeping you very busy, aren't we? Okay, and in terms of presumably there's funding in place to bring the site forward from the council's point of view.
Yes, absolutely. There's funding agreed for the purchase of the land, funding agreed to develop the 6 pitches, and it is a political priority.
So planning applications in, kind of talk me through from deciding the plan application, what's the time frame for bringing the site forward, practically speaking?
The planning application is in. As I said, we'd hope to go to committee this year and hopefully get approval for that scheme, subject to the committee's decision. Then obviously there would be discharging of conditions Obviously, no Section 106 agreement because it's with ourselves and direct delivery, and then subject to discharging the conditions, maybe start on site 25, 26, 26, 27. And then the build period isn't hugely extensive because essentially the provision there is for the small buildings essentially which contain the toilet blocks, etc. And then it's hard standing essentially to accommodate the caravans, etc.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions. If there aren't any other points, I shall hand back to Dr. Oh, any modifications? Keep them referred.
There are no modifications.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to site number 9, Catford Police Station and Phoenix Community Housing. You've been very patient sitting through the agenda, and we've now reached the site of your interest. So I have a few questions relating to this site, and it may be that there are aspects that you can help us with. I'm going to come to the council first. So the background to this site is that it was in the identified in the A21 development framework, and you've used that as your assumptions. And it's currently vacant and on the market. I've seen the for sale boards on the building. How long has it been on the market? And it might be a point that
It's now no longer in the market on the market and is controlled by Phoenix Community Housing.
and in terms of the residential capacity that the council is expecting, I know Phoenix have got a different view about the capacity for it.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say the council has quite a strong working relationship with Phoenix Community Housing, and we were very pleased to see Phoenix purchase the sites. We've worked well with them in the past to deliver very high quality schemes with a high proportion of affordable housing. So, and we are in a PPA with a pre-application performance agreement with Phoenix Housing to prepare for the planning application. It is a site that we have looked again at the capacity on the basis of the emerging pre-application discussions which have been going positively. I'm looking to Angela to update me on where we are exactly with the net capacity.
Yes, so for that, we have increased the units from 24 up to 54, so that's an extra 30 units on that site. We did that through a theoretical approach, which looked at, it used the residential density technical paper, and looked at the surrounding developments that had taken place in the vicinity of the site, and used the density from that to generate that figure. That was because at the time we haven't had sufficient pre-app discussions in terms of the exact scale for development on the site as yet.
So I think You said that pre-application PPA, is that, are we in a pre-application or do we have a planning performance agreement?
Sorry, we have a
Merging
PP
the words.
Yes, sorry. We have a PPA in place, yes.
So in terms of that planning performance agreement, what's the timeline for the milestones in it? Is it something that Phoenix can answer more easily than the council?
Thanks, Inspector. We acquired the site in 2022, and since then have put a development brief in place. And as David said, there we now have a PPA in place with the council, and we're progressing with the design development. Our board have approved funding to take that forward to a planning application in December this year, with a view to starting on site by March 26. And the relevance of March 26 is that's the end of the current affordable homes programme with the GLA. And we've already secured an indicative allocation for the development of this scheme. It's been pretty high profile, I think, between ourselves, the council and the GLA in terms of getting the support to develop Catford Police Station into a scheme of affordable homes. But I think it's probably worth saying that although we're a trusted, valued partner of the local authority, we've done lots of new homes to a very high quality and standard. We're not immune from the economic climate and context. And therefore, in order to deliver a viable scheme, we need quantum. And we're really pleased that there's been a modification to the plan in terms of the capacity of the site. It's really welcomed. I guess my plea would be that we would like that to be increased further, given that we've had our first pre-app with the council, I think on 68 units, 68 homes. And our expectation is sort of north of 60 for the development to be viable, given the current economic situation. I'm sure we'll talk about the employment space, but again, that is of significant concern to us in that there's over 1,000 square metres of employment space allocated to this site, which frankly would reduce the number of affordable homes that we could provide by 14. We're in the business of providing affordable homes. We bought Catford Police Station because it's on our patch. It's very close to our head office. Our estates are our homes are very close to our hub. We work in a very, within probably about 3 or 4 miles of our main office. We're not pepper potted across the borough. So Catford Police Station has always been a strategic opportunity for us, given how close it is to our head office. And within our head office, we have community facilities. We have spare space for the potential for meetings and other activities. We're in the business of providing affordable homes for the local community and housing options for the local community. And in order for us to provide employment space or mixed use space, we have to be absolutely satisfied that there's demand for it. We don't get funding for that space. We get funding for the homes. And our recent experience with a development we have in Catford on Rushy Green, which is a red route on a high street, where we've got just under 400 square metres of retail space, is that we can't let it. We can't let it. Our agent is saying it's extremely difficult at the moment to find operators. So you can understand why we might be quite cautious in pursuing employment space when the evidence that we have, we've saw separate evidence from Savills regarding the opportunity of office space, and clearly that concluded that it really wasn't the ideal location for office space. And we feel that's consistent with other uses. So it is our desire really to remove the need for employment space within this particular allocation.
Thank you for that. So from the council's perspective, was this site ever considered as a pure housing site? Was it always including some employment? And does the 68 homes, which I think we're currently talking about, include all of the employment space, or does it keep some of the employment space?
I think we'd always considered it a mixed-use site with employment fronting onto the A21 corridor. But equally, there are residential properties that front onto the A21 corridor, and the building itself, which is a rather fine building, which is being refurbished and retained. I think through the work that Phoenix have done, could equally be refurbished to residential properties as well. And I think there's no doubt a balance to be struck here. I think we've talked before about finite land. We have got an absolute essential need for affordable housing. And I know that there has been a lot of evidence and work being prepared by Phoenix about the non-residential floor space within this site. The 54 and the essentially the non-residential floor space would have to be essentially converted to residential to match more or less the kind of Phoenix scheme as it currently stands. The local plan is indicative in terms of the capacities, and these are the types of discussions and the balances that we have to make through the development management process. And what is the public benefit, the delivery of affordable housing versus non-residential. So it's a long-winded way of saying I'm not sure where we are with that. I guess what I'm saying is that these are indicative figures, and should through the development management process there be sufficient evidence to show that there isn't the demand in this particular location for this employment use, and the council decides that the affordable housing offer is the ultimate priority, then that is where we would tend to lean to. I'm not sure I can say much more than that here. I might take that away and have some internal conversations, if I may.
Thank you. So in terms of the Savills office market assessment report, what was the date of that report, please? Okay, well I've got that report, but clearly it's a live issue, so I'm not going to offer my opinion on that for fear to fetter any future decision that the council may make on that site. But in terms of how you're going to bring the site forward, Phoenix, in terms of phasing and what your thoughts are and the time scales, please.
As I mentioned earlier, we've already started the design development. In fact, we have a design review of our initial design review panel on Monday, and we've had a pre-app where we discussed principles around massing, had feedback from relevant officers within the council, which was really positive. And we really do welcome the increase in capacity. I think that's an absolute positive step. We obviously would consider it helpful to push that further, because we feel the site has the capacity to be increased beyond the 54. And certainly for our scheme to be viable, we need it to be more than that. It's our wish that we submit a plan application in by the end of this year, so December, January. We have a PPA in place, so once it's been submitted, we anticipate it to go through due process with a permission sometime in 2025 to enable us to make a start on site by March 26. We have the project team in place, and we'll look to procure a contractor in advance via PCSA to do some enabling works, and to establish costs before we enter into a JCT and in advance of the planning application being approved, so that when it is approved, or subject to it being approved, we will be able to make a start by that March deadline. The GLA are very supportive of the project, and we've already discussed grant rates and capital funding with them. And our board at Phoenix have put funding in place to progress the design development, and we'll be looking to secure funding to take the scheme forward later this year. And notwithstanding the fact that the building is locally listed, whilst we welcome the protection of this local asset, and we did some public consultation last week where we invited the local community to come and talk to us about what we were planning to do with the building, and that was really well received, and people were really pleased to know that the building was going to be developed for new homes. So we feel we've hit the ground running, and we're in a position to achieve that delivery timeframe, subject to planning.
So I think the housing trajectory lead puts the 54 that we were originally working to in year 5, but subject to approvals, it may come forward earlier than that.
So in terms of completion and the new homes being available, we're anticipating a sort of 18-month to 2-year build, given the complexity of part new build and part refurb. But that's just indicative at this moment in time.
Thank you. So any modifications for site number 9, please?
Yes, there are some modifications. So the modifications I have are set out at in the addendum at modification reference MO264. And the first of those speaks to the housing trajectory and the time frame for delivery. Years 1 to 5, yes. The next speaks to the indicative development capacity, so an increase from 24 to 54. The second modification following that is at MO313, and that is that's proposed to paragraph 17.45 and includes the insertion of additional text at the end of that sentence. So the sentence in full will read: mixed use redevelopment with compatible residential, commercial, community and main town centre uses with compatible non-residential uses at ground floor level. Obviously said within the context of this discussion. And then modification MO 314, which is to paragraph 17.48 criterion 1, which deletes words and inserts new words. So I will read out the completed sentence in full. Development should respond positively to the site's context, new words, proportion and features of, and there's some deletions, of terrace homes along Conisborough Crescent. That's all of the modifications.
Any final points on site allocation number 9? Okay, thank you. Move on to site number 10 then, please. So this is the home base Argos on Bromley Road. So this is another site where initially it wasn't considered for having development potential, but has been reconsidered, like some of the sites. I think representations are concerned about the mix of uses on the site and the capacities. So if the council would just like to outline a response to that, please.
Yes, I'm afraid there's been a further update to the site. The site has been recently sold, and we received notification, was it last week? I'm looking at my colleagues here. I think it was last week that the site has recently been sold. The letter that the council received didn't say much more than that, other than they had intended to put on the site a new use and had agreed I think it was an 8 to 10 year lease. So we're in a sort of in a position now where obviously the previous landowner who was engaging with the council is no longer the landowner. So the council needs to engage with the new landowner and understand what the longer term position may be. As we've heard from participants today, it's not unusual for these types of sites to have leaseholder arrangements in place with break contracts, contract breaks, etc. So unfortunately, I don't have much more information to give to the inspectors on this site at present, other than we will have to move our assumptions, and I think Angela has preempted this and moved it in the slower delivery option to year 14.
And is the intention to still retain that residential and town centre floor space mix on the site to go forward and discuss with new landowner?
Yes, absolutely. In accordance with the London plan and the need to identify these low density sites and associated car park for mixed use development. And then we'd seek to engage with the landowner to understand what the prospect is for future redevelopment of the site in the longer term.
And what sort of constraints have we got on that site?
There are no significant constraints on the site other than there is a large pond on the site, which is a feature that we would want to retain and improve, and is in the development guidelines or development guidelines number 4.
So looking at the viability study, it looks like a site that's reasonably viable to a point, but obviously given that new information that you've just explained, then that's the position as we know it today, but could change.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, generally, these types of uses with the associated car park, because of the increase in overall floor space, but also the mix of use in terms of residential, makes it, relatively viable. But again, we'll have to speak to the owner to see what the future holds for that site.
Okay, and modifications, please.
There is a single modification that's proposed within PD11. I'll just give you the reference. That's MO 130, and I suspect that given the events, it is slightly redundant, but it was in relation to the name of the site, and I appreciate this is an issue that's been it was raised yesterday. My understanding is that the current site name is unambiguous. It is the home base and Argos site, so I suspect the modification is now redundant.
Right, thank you for that one. We'll move on to number 14. This is the Best Way Cash and Carry site. So this is the final one of the site allocations in this group. So for this site, have there been any discussions with landowners on a development timeline for this site, or has it been density assumptions applied, and that's where we're at?
Yeah, so for this one, we've essentially taken the density assumptions, the mathematical density assumptions of standard urban PTEL1, 80 dwellings per hectare, and then applied that to the site. We've allocated this site mainly because of the London plan direction, and it is something that we sometimes have trouble with in terms of cash and carry and the particular use class of cash and carry, and sometimes, because it isn't strictly retail, But the London Plan Policy also mentions, and I'm just going to bring it up, optimise the potential for housing deliveries on all suitable and available brownfield sites through their development plans and planning decisions, especially from the following sources of capacity. And B is mixed-use redevelopment of car parks and low-density retail parks and supermarkets. And C is housing intensification on other appropriate low-density sites in commercial, leisure and infrastructure uses. So there's always a bit of debate and ambiguity over whether or not cash and carries actually fall into that, given their categorization. But we do feel that it is a kind of suitable site for redevelopment and principally residential redevelopment. We haven't had any particular contact from the developers, as far as I'm aware. I'm looking at Kanoya, who's shaking her head.
So this one's looking at a 100% residential and a 136 units. Are we still on 136 units?
Yes, that's correct. And it's positioned at the end of the plan period due to the lack of communication with the landowner.
How will this allocation affect the highway network? When I saw this site, it's got traffic control, and the phasing keeps you waiting quite some time to get in and out of the site. So, if it's going to be a residential use with 136 units, what will the traffic impact be?
I'm afraid I don't know.
It's possibly a very specific question there when it's not got a planning application with its details. But in terms of infrastructure requirements to bring that site forward, what would be the topics that would need to be looked at to bring this site forward in terms of infrastructure requirements?
There are a number of planning designations or designations to consider. It's in a critical drainage area, so obviously that will have to be addressed. It's in an air quality focus area, and obviously that will have to be addressed. I was just looking to see if there was any sinks next to the railway. There doesn't appear to be, so that wouldn't necessarily have to be addressed. It has been through the flood risk sequential test and passed. So other than that, again, the kind of infrastructure requirements would probably be the kind of access arrangements and how that would impact on the local transport network.
And in terms of the ownership of the site, is it a single landowner, and would it be a site that would be brought forward in a single phase?
It is a single land ownership, and it may be brought forward in phases, but it is a smaller site, 1.7 hectares. So it's conceivable that construction would start and be completed in a single go.
And in terms of viability, it doesn't appear to have been assessed in its own right. Which typology would it fall under?
The number, we're having a look at number 7, which seems to be the closest, albeit that it doesn't quite match in terms of the quantum of residential development.
Yeah, what scale of development would typology 7 include?
Well, it's been tested at 25 residential units, so as I said, it doesn't fit perfectly into that. I think, as Carol has just prompted me, it's sort of one of the few, if not the only, 100% residential larger sites that we have in the borough.
Any modifications to this one, please?
No, there are no modifications.
So let's move on to site allocations already under construction. So there is one in this area, which is the Excalibur Estate. Could the council just explain to us where that construction phasing has got to, and what's been delivered and what's yet to be delivered, and is it on track?
So the site is covered by a hybrid application, so it has an outline with some reserved matters. The site allocation and the plan associated isn't particularly helpful, but if you drew a straight line between Welland Road to the west and Castilian Road to the east, you have a northern section and a southern section. And the northern section, the first phase, is the phase that's under construction. Some of it's partly constructed, which is included within the site's indicative capacity of 402 remaining. The site, the development potential of the site effectively reflects the planning application that has been approved. I'm just looking at the site trajectory.
At the moment, phase 3 is currently being completed, which is 102 units, and that's on the trajectory for year 1, and that should be handed over later this year. And we're starting to have discussions with L&Q, who are bringing forward this site on our behalf, because it is a council-owned land, for phases 4 and 5, for the remaining approximate 300 units. We haven't got a specific timescale for that as yet, although the L&Q are optimistic about continuing the scheme.
And has the phase that's almost phase 3 being completed in year 1, has that been delivered according to what expectations were?
I think there had been a slight delay. I think it was supposed to have been transferred over by now. So there's about 3 or 4 month delay, I think.
But to the best of your knowledge, construction is on track to deliver to that timescale that you've just outlined.
That's our understanding at this stage, yes.
Are there any concerns that the site wouldn't come forward as envisaged and complete?
We don't have any intelligence that suggests that it wouldn't be brought forward. It's not a site that I'm hugely familiar with. I suggest that if we get back to the development management officer who's dealing with the case, and we can come back to you on that particular site.
That would be helpful, thank you. Thank you. So let's move on to the remaining site allocations. So number 11, Beadle's Garage. This is another site that was identified, but not having housing potential originally, but it's now got some housing potential. Are the site areas and capacity assumptions justified for this site? I can see it's developable beyond 15 years, so it's along in the timeline.
Yes, so obviously we've been responding to the London Plan and the adoption of that London Plan in 2021, and particularly policy H1 that I referred to on a number of occasions. We also looked at this through the A21 development framework, and sought to demonstrate that it could be delivered for mixed use redevelopment. We haven't had any contact with the landowner, albeit that we've had no objections either to the site allocation. The development potential sits at in 95 net residential units, and then 610 square meters of employment floor space.
And from the what I've read, an occupier was, according to their representation, wanted to know the title reference and the title register to understand whether this was a site that they actually owned. I read that somewhere, so I'm assuming ownership is clear and discussions will take place in due course.
Yes, my colleague is nodding his head, Carol.
Yes, it's the VW garage on the corner, isn't it? Which it looks well established.
I can picture the regulation 19 rep mentally, yes.
And in terms of the viability appraisal, which typology?
So that's reference 10, small mixed use.
Does the council see any prospect of this site coming forward any earlier in the plan period than what it's declared it as?
We don't have any intelligence to suggest it would be coming forwards, but we will be, contacting landowners once again and trying to encourage them to bring sites forward.
So turning any modifications to that one?
No modifications.
Thank you. I almost forgot. Site number 7. Again, this is another site identified in the Schlar. No housing initially, but it's now responding to a review, and it's a mixed use site. Are there any particular infrastructure requirements or costs associated with this particular allocation? I think Thames Water, their representation was about water supply, but not wastewater.
Water supply, not wastewater. I mean, I guess any redevelopment would have to go through the usual steps of making sure there's adequate water supply to the site, as per any redevelopment of the site, engaging with the infrastructure providers to make sure that there is adequate capacity. I'm not aware of any particular issue within this area per se, but we can certainly take that away and have a look at it.
Thank you. And in terms of the land ownership and developer interest, I see this one's down for still down for years 11 to 15.
It's in year 15 of the, oh, sorry. Yeah, year 15 of the plan period. It's in a single land ownership. The non-residential floor space effectively makes the assumption that the store would be re-provided, and then residential above, essentially in a kind of urban format. There is a fairly substantial car parking to the front of the site, so it is conceivable that you could effectively create a temporary store, etc., and redevelop the site in that manner.
And in terms of existing floor space, non-residential floor space, existing to proposed, is there a difference, or would it be like for like?
I believe we've got it like for like, to the best of our ability in terms of the plans that we are working with.
Just as a side note, the examination heard earlier from a food store operator who perhaps doesn't have much experience of developing sites for mixed use schemes. As the inspectors may be aware, Lidl, particularly across South London, are well known, along with their competitor Aldi, for developing mixed use schemes at locations similar to this. I think, given the age of the site and the fact that the current store may be coming towards the end of its operational life, I think it's reasonable for the council to take an approach that this is a redevelopment opportunity towards the end of the plan period.
And have there been any discussions to date for this site on development?
No, not yet, no.
Again, I think this site would come under a specific typology rather than a.
I think we would consider it under type 10, which is a small mixed use. It makes the assumption of 25 net residential units as opposed to the scheme of 17, but that seems a reasonable assumption.
Any modifications for this one?
There are no modifications to this allocation.
So turning to the final site, number 12 in this area of the plan. Now for this site, what's the difference between the net, the non-residential floor space, the existing, and the and the proposed? 'Cause it's still a mixed use site, this one that's being proposed, isn't it?
I think we've got minus 110 square meters. So essentially, we were looking at like for like, so we may have to up that non-residential floor space to 1,560 square meters. Essentially, we were looking at the reprovision of the store in this scenario. There is a public house on the site as well, which we'd want to retain and continue operating. The developer did express interest in having this as a site allocation and to develop the site in the longer term. We have indicated that this is towards the end of the planned period.
And is it in a single ownership? How would the site come forward?
I think there are two ownerships. I think the public house is in one ownership, and then the Downham Co-op is in a separate ownership. Again, we felt that there was sufficient space in the car park to allow that kind of phased approach for continuity of store.
And are there any particular infrastructure requirements being costed?
No significant infrastructure requirements that are being costed.
And from your current knowledge of the two landowners' intentions, is the expected timescale and rate of development realistic?
The landowner expressed an interest to develop the site in the longer term. He seemed content with towards the end of the planned period as the timescale.
Is it under the small